They say the camera never lies. Mine captured the exact moment my in-laws sneered at my dad like he was cheap furniture. But the second a stranger lowered his lens, bowed to him, and uttered a title that froze the room. The power dynamic shifted forever. By the time the flash faded, my marriage, their money, and our family hierarchy had been completely rewritten. My name is Maren Ellery, and standing here in this renovated warehouse studio in Harborview, Connecticut, I feel less like a person and more like a prop in a stage play directed by my mother-in-law. The air conditioning is humming at a low, expensive purr, keeping the climate perfectly preserved for the cashmere sweaters and silk blends adorning the Carter family. It is 2 weeks before Christmas, a time of year that Vivian Carter treats with the tactical precision of a military campaign. The theme for this year's holiday card is casual elegance, which in Carter speak translates to jeans that cost $400 and sweaters that cost even more. I am 32 years old. I am a board-certified internal medicine physician. I save lives for a living. Yet, in this room, under the glare of professional softbox lights, I am reduced to nothing more than Eli Carter's wife, the accessory he picked up from the wrong side of the tracks. Chin up, Maren. You are creating a shadow on Eli's shoulder. Vivian directs from her spot in the center of the arrangement. She does not look at me when she speaks. She looks at the monitor tethered to the photographer's camera. Sorry, I murmur, shifting my weight. We are taking a break while the photographer, a young man with an artistic bun and intense eyes, adjusts the lighting rig. The silence in the room is filled only by the tapping of shoes and the rustle of fabric. My dad, Tom Ellery, is standing off to the side near the craft service table, looking at a bottle of sparkling water like it might bite him. He is wearing his navy blazer. I know that blazer. He bought it at a discount outlet 10 years ago for a funeral. He had it dry cleaned twice for today. The lapels are a little too wide for current fashion, and the fabric has that telltale shine of polyester that has seen too many irons. But he brushed it off with such care this morning. Hold this for a second, babe, Eli says, thrusting his phone into my hand so he can fix his hair in the vanity mirror. My cowlick is acting up. I take the phone. I am not a snoop. I respect privacy. But the screen is alive, buzzing against my palm. A banner notification slides down from the top. It is from a group chat titled Carter Core. I stare at the words. I know this chat exists. I have heard the pinging of it at dinner parties, seen the secret smiles shared between Eli, Greg, and Vivian while I sat chewing my salad. I was explicitly told it was for logistical planning regarding the family estate. But the preview on the screen is not about logistics. It is a photo, a candid shot taken just minutes ago. The angle is low and unflattering. It captures my dad standing awkwardly by the backdrop, his hands clasped in front of him, looking unsure of where to place his feet. The lighting in the photo highlights the fraying threads on his cuff and the way his dress shirt pulls slightly at the buttons. Below the photo is a message from Bethany, my sister-in-law, who is currently stuck in traffic but apparently active enough to poison the well from afar. Why is he dressed like the building superintendent? My breath hitches. The skull emoji stares back at me, a digital tombstone for my father's dignity. My stomach drops, a sensation like missing a step on a steep staircase. I look up at Dad. He catches my eye and offers a tentative, hopeful smile. He adjusts his tie, his fingers rough and thick, the skin permanently stained with the faint, unscrubbable greasiness of 40 years of manual labor. He looks so proud to be here. He thinks this photo shoot is a gesture of inclusion. He thinks he has finally been welcomed. I look back at the phone. Another vibration. Another message slides into view. This one is from Greg, my father-in-law. Greg, who shook my dad's hand an hour ago and slapped him on the back. He still smells of rag water and bus terminals. I hope the lens filter can scrub that out. I feel the bile rise in my throat. It tastes like acid and betrayal. My thumb hovers over the screen. I should not look. I should lock the phone and hand it back. But I cannot look away. Below Greg's comment, a reaction appears. It is not a defense. It is not an angry retort telling his parents to stop being cruel. It is 3 laughing, crying emojis. From Eli, my husband, the man who sleeps beside me, the man who claims he loves how grounded I am. He is laughing. He is participating. He is one of them. Okay, everyone back in. Let's get the big group shot, the photographer calls out. Clapping his hands to break the tension, I seem to be the only one feeling. I go numb. I lock the phone and place it on the small prop table next to the sofa. My hands are shaking, but I clasp them together to hide the tremors. I walk back to the set, my legs moving on autopilot. Okay, let's get the parents in the middle, the photographer instructs. Vivian and Greg immediately claim the center spots on the velvet settee. Eli slides in next to them, draping an arm over the back of the sofa. The picture of the golden sun, Bethany, who has just burst through the door, throws her coat aside and rushes in, squeezing between her mother and Eli. And sir, you, in the blue jacket? The photographer points to my dad. Dad steps forward. Yes? Just on the end there, the photographer says. Dad moves to the side of the group. He is barely in the frame. He is standing next to Greg, who subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifts his shoulder to angle away from him. It is a physical wall, a barrier of tweed and arrogance. Squeeze in tight, say family, the photographer commands. The Carters lean in. It is a fluid, practiced motion. They become a hydra of perfect teeth and expensive grooming. In doing so, they naturally, unconsciously push outward. I watch it happen in slow motion. Dad is nudged. He takes a half step back to keep his balance. He is now teetering on the edge of the seamless paper backdrop. He looks down at his shoes, scuffed work boots he polished until they gleamed, and then back up at the camera. He smiles. It is a wide, genuine smile that crinkles the corners of his eyes. He is just happy to be included in the picture. Vivian, tilt your chin down, the photographer says, peering through the viewfinder. Make sure the composition is clean, Vivian says, her voice low but carrying that distinct tone of command she uses with service staff. We want the focus on the center. The edges can be cropped if necessary, to maintain the aesthetic. She does not say his name. She does not say Tom. She says edges. She says crop. My dad is the edge. My dad is the debris she plans to edit out later. The photographer pauses. He lowers the camera slightly, frowning at the LCD screen, then looks up at the group. He looks confused. He lifts the camera again, snaps 2 rapid frames, and then stops completely. The silence in the room stretches. It becomes heavy. Is something wrong? Greg asks, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Is it the lighting? The photographer does not answer. He slowly lowers the heavy DSLR camera from his face. The strap hangs loose around his neck. He takes a step forward, his eyes locked not on Vivian, not on the wealthy Carters, but on the man standing on the periphery. He squints, as if trying to reconcile a memory with reality. He looks at my dad's face, the weathered lines, the strong jaw, the kindness in the eyes that the Carters mistake for weakness. The photographer's expression shifts. The professional detachment evaporates, replaced by a dawn of recognition, followed immediately by a look of profound, stunned respect. He unhooks the camera strap from his neck and places the expensive equipment on the floor with deliberate care. What is he doing? Eli whispers to me, sounding annoyed. We're paying by the hour. The photographer ignores him. He ignores all of them. He walks past the lights, past the monitors, walking straight toward the edge of the set. My dad looks nervous. He starts to raise his hands, perhaps thinking he has done something wrong, that he is about to be asked to step out of the photo entirely. I am sorry, my dad starts to say, his voice rough. I can move if... The photographer stops 2 feet in front of my father. And then, to the absolute shock of everyone in the room, the photographer bows. It is not a sarcastic gesture. It is a deep, formal bow of reverence, the kind you give to a dignitary or a war hero. The room goes dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the polished concrete floor. Vivian freezes, her mouth slightly open. Greg's eyebrows knit together. Eli looks at me, confusion written all over his face. The photographer straightens up. He looks my father in the eye, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I apologize, sir. I did not recognize you with the—" He gestures vaguely to the setting, to the way my father has been shoved to the side. "I assume you are here incognito?" My dad blinks, confused. I am just here for the Christmas card, with my daughter." The photographer turns to the room. He looks at Vivian, then at Greg, his gaze hardening. Then he looks back at my father, and speaks the words that will shatter the glass ceiling of this family's arrogance. "Everyone, please," the photographer says, his voice ringing with authority. "Show some respect for—" To understand why I stood frozen in that studio, letting a room full of people treat my father like a stain on their pristine carpet. You have to understand the geography of my life. I did not come from Harborview. I did not come from money, or legacy, or the kind of families that have a family crest. I came from Millstone, Ohio. Millstone was a town that woke up to the sound of shift whistles and went to sleep to the hum of the interstate. It was a place where gray was the dominant color. Gray pavement, gray factory smoke, gray winter skies. My father, Tom Ellery, was the only splash of color in my world. Though he usually came home covered in the grime of the city, he worked double shifts at the central bus depot, managing the fleet maintenance. He was a mechanic, a supervisor, a janitor, and a security guard all rolled into one exhausted body. When I was 14, my mother passed away. It was sudden, an aneurysm that stole her while she was folding laundry. After the funeral, the neighbors brought casseroles for 2 weeks, and then they stopped. But my dad did not stop. He could have crumbled. He could have fallen into a bottle, which was the popular grieving method for men in Millstone. Instead, he became both parents. He learned to braid hair. Though his fingers were thick and permanently stained with engine grease, he learned to cook. Though everything tasted slightly charred, he worked 16 hours a day so I could have new cleats for soccer and a calculator for calculus. I remember my 8th grade awards ceremony. The auditorium was packed with parents from the better neighborhoods, men in pressed suits and women smelling of expensive vanilla perfume. I was receiving the award for the highest GPA in the district. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, shielding my eyes against the spotlight. I looked for him. He was standing at the very back of the hall, leaning against the double doors. He had come straight from a double shift. He was wearing his heavy canvas work jacket with the name patch that said Tom over his heart, and his work boots were caked with mud. He looked out of place, like a rough sketch in a gallery of oil paintings. But when they handed me that certificate, he clapped. He did not just clap. He applauded with his hands held high over his head, his calloused palms coming together with a thunderous sound that echoed over the polite golf claps of the other parents. I saw people turn and stare. I saw a mother in the front row wrinkle her nose, but Dad just beamed, his teeth white against his grease-smudged face, looking at me like I was the only person in the room. That was the fuel that got me out. I studied with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to heal people. Yes, but deep down, I think I also wanted to buy my father a house where he never had to touch a wrench again. When I got into the university on a full academic scholarship, the tuition was covered, but the living expenses were not. The dorms, the meal plan, the textbooks that cost $300 each. It was a mountain we could not climb. 2 weeks before I left, I came home to find the garage empty. The 1972 Harley-Davidson, a beast of chrome and leather that my dad had spent 5 years restoring, was gone. It was his one joy, his one escape. On Sunday mornings, he would ride it to the county line and back, just to feel the wind. He walked into the kitchen and placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside was $4,000 in cash. "Dad," I whispered, realizing what he had done. "Your bike." "It is just metal." "Marin," he said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "You are the future. He gripped my shoulders, his eyes fierce and unyielding. "Promise me something. Promise me you will never apologize for being smarter than the people in the room. You belong there just as much as they do." I promised. I took that money and I went to university, and that was where I met Eli Carter. Eli was everything Millstone was not. He was Silveridge. He was golden-haired, easygoing, and moved through the world with the relaxed confidence of someone who has never had a credit card declined. On our second date, he talked about his gap year in Italy and the charity gala his mother organized for the opera. He was charming. He made me laugh. He made me feel like Cinderella, plucked from the ashes and invited to the ball. I thought love could bridge the gap between our zip codes. I was naive. The first time I met his parents, Vivian and Greg Carter, I should have seen the warning signs. They lived in a sprawling estate with a driveway longer than my entire street back home. I had spent hours agonizing over what to wear. I settled on a floral dress I found at a vintage store for $12. I thought it looked classic. When I walked into their foyer, under a chandelier that probably cost more than my father's annual salary, Vivian Carter descended the stairs. She was small, sharp, and immaculate. She stopped 2 steps from the bottom and swept her eyes over me, starting at my sensible shoes and ending at the slightly faded collar of my dress. "Welcome," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Eli has told us so much about you." Dinner was an interrogation disguised as conversation. We sat at a mahogany table that seemed to stretch for miles. "And your father, Marin?" Vivian asked, slicing her filet mignon with surgical precision. "What is his profession? Is he in academia as well?" I sat up straighter. I remembered my promise. "No, my dad works at the bus terminal in Millstone. He manages the maintenance division." I made it sound as official as possible, but the silence that followed was deafening. Vivian put down her fork. She brought a napkin to her lips and let out a soft, breathy sound. "Oh." It was a single syllable, but it carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. Greg Carter, a man who looked like he was born wearing a tie, chuckled as he swirled his red wine. "Well," he said, glancing at Eli and then at me, "at least public transportation is a stable industry. The poor always need to get to work, right? It will never go bankrupt." The table laughed. It was a light, tinkling laughter that made my skin crawl. I looked at Eli, waiting for him to defend my father, to explain that he was the hardest working man in Ohio. Eli just smiled and took a sip of his water. "Dad, don't be political," he said lightly. Later. As Eli drove me back to my dorm, I sat in silence, fighting back tears. "They didn't like me," I said. "You are being paranoid," Eli replied, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "They liked you fine. They just have high standards. Marin, they want to make sure you are serious. Don't be so sensitive. Once they get to know you, they will love you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted it so bad that I swallowed my pride. I told myself that I was the one with the chip on my shoulder. I told myself that once I became a doctor, once I had the title and the white coat, the Carters would see me as an equal. I was wrong. The contrast between our families became a chasm I tried desperately to fill. I remember the night before my medical school interviews. I was back home in Millstone for the weekend. I needed a suit, but I could not afford one. Dad went into his closet and pulled out a woman's blazer he had found at a church sale. It was navy blue, simple, professional. He set up the ironing board in the kitchen. He did not really know how to iron delicate fabrics. He used a spray bottle of water and a heavy metal iron, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth in concentration. I watched him from the doorway, his broad back bent over the board, steam rising around him like a halo. He smoothed every wrinkle with his rough hands, treating that cheap polyester jacket like it was a royal robe. "You are going to knock them dead. Marin," he told me, handing it to me on a wire hanger. "You look like a boss." At the same time, miles away in Silveridge, the Carters were discussing me. I know this because Eli told me later, thinking it was a compliment. "Mom said you have grit," Eli had told me over the phone. She said, "At least the girl has ambition. It is fascinating to watch, like a stray dog learning a trick." Eli laughed when he repeated it. He thought it was funny. He thought it showed acceptance. I stood there in my dorm room, holding the phone, looking at the blazer my dad had ironed with so much love. I felt the heat of shame burning my cheeks. Not shame for my father, but shame that I was dating a man who allowed his mother to call me a stray dog. But I stayed. I stayed because I thought I could win. I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough money, and polished myself enough, I could force them to respect us. I thought I could drag the Carters into the light of decency by sheer force of will. I did not realize then that some people prefer the dark, especially when they can look down on everyone else from the shadows. I walked into my marriage carrying the weight of two worlds, the quiet, calloused pride of my father and the shiny, razor-sharp contempt of my in-laws. I thought I could balance them. I had no idea the scales were rigged from the start. The diamond on my finger was flawless, a heavy solitaire that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 rainbows. Eli proposed on a cliffside in mesmerizingly beautiful Amalfi Coast, during what he called a spontaneous getaway. Though I later learned his mother had booked the flights and selected the ring, I was so blinded by the romance of it, by the sheer cinematic perfection of the moment, that I did not realize the ring was not just a promise of marriage, it was a retainer fee. From the moment the engagement was announced, the illusion that this was a partnership between two people evaporated. The planning process was not a collaboration, it was a hostile takeover. "We simply must book Ridgecrest Vineyards," Vivian announced 3 days after we returned. We were sitting in her sunroom, surrounded by bridal magazines she had already marked up with color-coded sticky notes. "The waiting list is usually 2 years, but I made a call to the owner. He owes Greg a favor from the zoning board hearing last fall. He can squeeze us in for June." I hesitated. I had looked up Ridgecrest. It was the kind of place where the grass looked like it had been manicured with tweezers. "Vivian, that place is beautiful, but the rental fee alone is $40,000. That is more than my student loan balance." Vivian waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clinking. "Oh, darling, do not be pedestrian. It is not about the price tag. It is about the standard. The Carter name carries certain expectations. We cannot have people thinking Greg is having liquidity issues." I looked at my dad, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, holding a porcelain teacup that looked comically small in his hands. He cleared his throat. "You know," Dad said, his voice gentle but hopeful, "we have that big open field behind the house in Millstone. My buddy Sal has a massive tent we could borrow. We could do a real nice barbecue, ribs, corn, maybe get the local bluegrass band. It would be warm, personal." The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds. Vivian turned her head slowly, offering Dad a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "That sounds adorable, Tom," she said. "Truly, like a lovely little picnic. But this is a wedding, and frankly, the optics of a barbecue would be confusing for our guests." She turned back to me, the smile instantly vanishing. "Ridgecrest it is." The guest list was the next battlefield. I had a list of 50 people, cousins, friends from med school, neighbors who had fed me when my mom died. Greg sat down with the list one evening, a gold pen in his hand, and began crossing names out with efficient, brutal strokes. "Who are the Millers?" he asked. "They lived next door to us for 20 years, I said. "Mrs. Miller taught me how to sew." "Gone," Greg said, slashing a line through their names. "And these people, the mechanic guys? Those are Dad's coworkers. They're like uncles to me." Greg sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked at Eli, who was scrolling on his phone on the sofa. "Son, explain to your fiancé that we are trying to curate an event, not host a union rally. We need to keep Marin's side lean. We do not want the reception to look like a staff meeting, do we?" I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I looked at Eli, waiting for him to say that these were the people who raised me. Eli just looked up, chuckled, and shrugged. "Dad has a point. Babe, It is going to be a tight room. We need space for the partners from the firm and the club members. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. I told myself it was just one day. I told myself that marriage was about compromise, even if the compromise felt an awful lot like erasure. Then the invoices started arriving. I had assumed, naively, that since the Carters were insisting on the 5-star venue, the imported orchids, and the 12-piece orchestra, they were handling the costs. That is how it worked in the movies. But a week after the venue was booked, an email landed in my inbox. It was an invoice for $25,000. The deposit. I called Eli in a panic. "Babe, they sent the bill to me. There must be a mistake." "Oh, right," Eli said, his voice breezy. "Listen, Mom and Dad are a little tied up right now. All their cash is locked into these long-term development bonds for the harbor project. Liquidity is a bit of a nightmare until next quarter. Can you cover it? I will pay you back as soon as the dividends clear." I looked at my bank account. I had just received my signing bonus for joining the hospital practice. It was a significant amount of money, the first real wealth I had ever possessed. It was supposed to be a down payment on a house, or a retirement fund for Dad. "It is a lot of money, Eli," I said softly. "It is an investment in us. Marin," he said, his tone shifting to that hurt, defensive quality he used so well. "Don't you trust me? We are going to be building an empire together. This is just temporary." So I paid it. I wrote the check for the venue, then the check for the florist, then the check for the caterer. I drained my savings, rationalizing every dollar as a brick in the foundation of our future. I was buying my way into their world, believing that once I paid the admission fee, I would be treated as a member. The humiliation came in smaller doses, too. 2 weeks before the wedding, we went for the final suit fittings. Dad had gone to a department store and bought a suit off the rack. It was charcoal gray, a synthetic blend that had a slight sheen under the fluorescent lights. He had spent $200 on it, which I knew was a stretch for him that month. He stood in front of the 3-way mirror in the high-end tailor shop where Eli was getting his bespoke tuxedo fitted. Dad tugged at the cuffs of his jacket. "Fits okay, I think," he said, looking at me for reassurance. "Maybe a little tight in the shoulders." Vivian walked over, holding a glass of complimentary champagne. She circled Dad like a shark inspecting a wounded seal. "It is functional," she said. She reached out and tugged the lapel, her nose wrinkling slightly at the texture of the fabric. "Tom, on the day of, when we do the formal portraits, maybe you could stand toward the back? Just so the fabric textures do not clash with the boy's Italian wool. We want the lines to be consistent." Dad's face fell. He took a step back, his shoulders slumping. "Sure, Vivian, whatever looks best." I turned to Eli, furious. "Eli, say something." Eli was sitting on the velvet ottoman, his phone in his hand. He was typing rapidly, a smirk playing on his lips. When I spoke, he jumped, quickly flipping his phone screen down on his knee. "What? Oh, yeah, sure. Mom just wants it to look perfect. Marin, relax." I saw the flash of a notification on his screen before he hit it. It was the group chat. I did not see the message then, but I knew the rhythm of his typing. He was not defending us. He was broadcasting the moment for an audience. The wedding day was a blur of white lace and expensive champagne. Ridgecrest was undeniably beautiful, the rolling hills of vines providing a backdrop that looked like a Renaissance painting. I walked down the aisle toward Eli, telling myself that the knot in my stomach was just nerves. But the moment that stayed with me, the moment that cut through the haze of adrenaline, was the speeches. Greg gave a polished, witty toast that mentioned Eli's achievements, the Carter legacy, and the merger of our lives, as if I were a small company being acquired by a conglomerate. Then it was Dad's turn. He walked up to the microphone, holding a piece of paper that shook in his trembling hands. He was wearing his charcoal suit, and true to his word, he had stayed in the background for most of the photos. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing over the silent, judging crowd. "Marin was the first person I ever loved more than myself," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He talked about braiding my hair before school. He talked about the nights I fell asleep studying at the kitchen table. He did not use big words. He did not try to be funny. He just spoke the raw, unvarnished truth of a father who had given everything he had to get his daughter to this moment. "I do not have much to give you two," he said, looking at Eli and me, "but I give you my heart, and I give you my girl. Take care of her." There were tears in his eyes when he finished. I was crying openly. As the applause died down, polite, restrained applause, I walked over to the head table to fix my train. I passed behind Vivian's chair. She was leaning toward one of her country club friends, a woman with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection. "Oh, it was sweet," Vivian whispered, not knowing I was there. "A little raw, a little quaint, but sweet. He tries so hard, doesn't he? It is almost painful to watch." I froze. My hand gripped the back of her chair. Quaint? A word you use for a rustic cabin or a child's drawing, not for a man laying his soul bare. I looked at Eli. He was laughing at something the groomsman next to him was saying, completely oblivious to the dagger his mother had just thrown at my father. I swallowed the anger. I pushed it down into the same deep, dark place where I had buried the cost of the wedding and the insults about the guest list. I told myself that this was just the friction of two worlds colliding. I told myself that once we were married, once we were truly a family, the dynamic would change. I told myself that I could protect Dad better from the inside. I did not know then that I was not entering a fortress to protect him. I was locking myself in a cage with the people who would hunt him for sport. The ink on our marriage license was barely dry when we closed on the townhouse in Harborview. It was a 3-story brick structure with ivy climbing the facade and a price tag that made my chest tighten every time I thought about it. Eli called it our starter home, a term that seemed ludicrous for a property that cost more than the entire street I grew up on. The financial arrangement was supposed to be a partnership, but like everything else in our relationship, the math was skewed. Eli was illiquid again, his assets tied up in trusts and futures that I did not fully understand and was too afraid to question for fear of looking unsophisticated. So, I emptied my savings account. I cashed out the small portfolio I had started building during my residency. But it was not enough. The down payment was colossal. That was when my father stepped in. He came to our apartment a week before the closing, wearing his work uniform, and slid a cashier's check across the counter. It was for $60,000. It was his retirement. It was the money he had saved from 40 years of overtime, of skipping lunches, of fixing buses while other men slept. "Dad, I cannot take this," I had said, tears stinging my eyes. "This is everything." "It is for you," he said, his voice firm. "I want you to be safe. I want you to have a roof that nobody can take away." When I suggested we write up a loan agreement, or at least put his name on the deed as a fractional owner, he shook his head violently. "No, if my name is on it, they will look at it differently. They will think it is lesser. This is yours. Marin, just yours." So we bought the house. Eli walked through the front door like a conquering king, talking about where to put the wine fridge. I walked in knowing that the floorboards beneath our feet were paid for by the sweat on my father's brow. It did not take long for the Carters to colonize our new home. They did not knock. They did not ask. They simply appeared. Vivian would sweep in on Tuesday afternoons with swatches of fabric, declaring that our beige curtains were depressingly middle management and needed to be replaced with raw silk. Greg would stop by on Thursday evenings, pouring himself a scotch from our cabinet and walking around the living room with his shoes on, talking loudly on his phone about mergers and acquisitions. They treated our home not as a separate residence, but as an annex to their estate in Silver Ridge, a guest house for when they were in the city. "You know," Greg said one evening, looking around our dining room, "this space is decent. When the board comes into town next month, we might host the cocktail hour here. It feels quaint, authentic." I started to notice a pattern in how they utilized us. It was a transactional loop that I had been too blind to see before. For Greg, I was not a daughter-in-law. I was a concierge physician. He would call me at the hospital in the middle of rounds to ask about a rash, or a twinge in his knee, or to demand I read the lab results he had just received from his concierge doctor, because he didn't trust the guy's tone. I saved him thousands of dollars in specialist consults, interpreting medical jargon for free over Sunday dinners. For Vivian, I was tech support and a digital airbrush. She would summon me to edit her photos for social media, making me smooth out her neck wrinkles and adjust the lighting until she looked 20 years younger. And for Eli used my father. Whenever something broke, a leaky faucet, a jammed window, a shelf that needed hanging, Eli did not call a handyman. He called Tom. "Hey, Marin, ask your dad if he's free Saturday," Eli would say. "The garage door is sticking again." And Dad would come. He would drive 40 minutes from Millstone, his toolbox rattling in the trunk of his old sedan, and he would spend his Saturday afternoon on his knees in our grease-stained garage while Eli sat inside watching college football. One rainy Tuesday in November, the dynamic reached a breaking point, though nobody but me seemed to hear the snap. The Carters were over for dinner. Vivian was in a foul mood because her housekeeper of 10 years had quit that morning without notice. "It is just so hard to find good help these days," Vivian complained, stabbing at her roasted chicken. "People have no work ethic. She left me with a sink full of crystal." Greg laughed, swirling his wine. "Well, do not worry, Viv. If things get really desperate, we have the backup team right here." He gestured with his fork between me and the empty chair where my dad usually sat when he visited. "We have Marin and her dad, the integrated maintenance and service crew." The table erupted. Bethany, my sister-in-law, giggled into her napkin. Eli threw his head back and laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed off the walls my father's money had bought. "That is good, Dad," Eli said, wiping his eye. "Integrated maintenance. I like that." My dad was not there that night, thank God, but I sat there, freezing in my chair, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking the enamel on my teeth. I was the help. I was the staff. I was the useful peasant they had allowed into the manor because I could fix the bodies in the buildings they were too soft to touch. Later that night, the anger was still simmering in my veins, hot and toxic. Eli had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted from a day of doing absolutely nothing. The TV was casting a blue flickering light across the room. His phone was sitting on the coffee table, face up. It buzzed, a single, short vibration. I glanced over. I usually respected his privacy. I had never looked through his phone before, but the name on the notification caught my eye. Carter Core. It was a group chat. I knew about the family chat, the one I was in, where we exchanged birthday wishes and logistical updates, but I was not in Carter Core. The message preview remained on the screen for a second. It was from Bethany. "Did you see the boots he was wearing last week? I swear he stole them from a construction site." My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Eli. He was snoring softly, his mouth slightly open. I reached out. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. I knew the passcode. He had told me once, years ago, when he needed me to check a flight time while he was driving. I typed it in, the phone unlocked. I opened the chat. I scrolled up, and my world dissolved. It was not just a few jokes. It was an archive of cruelty. It was a daily chronicle of their disdain for my father and me. I saw a photo of my dad from our wedding day. It was zoomed in on his hands, his rough, calloused, working man's hands resting on the white tablecloth. "Vivian, look at those knuckles. You can't scrub the blue collar off with soap." "Greg, he looks like he's about to ask the waiter if he can fix the dishwasher." I scrolled further back. There were months of this. They had nicknames for him. Mr. Bus, the janitor, Old Grease. Then I saw my name. "Greg, I hope Marin is not expecting us to chip in for the anniversary party. If she wants to play high society, she needs to fund it. If she hadn't snagged Eli, she'd probably be checking blood pressure for passengers on a Greyhound bus right now." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs. But the worst part, the part that made the bile rise in my throat, was not what Greg or Vivian said. It was what Eli said. I found a message from 3 weeks ago. It was in response to a joke Greg had made about how lucky I was to have married into the Carter name, implying I should be more grateful. Eli's response was right there, in blue and white. First, a shrugging emoji. Then the text. She is not going anywhere. Dad, she knows she punched above her weight. She is just happy to be in the club. I stared at the words until they blurred. She knows she punched above her weight. This was the man who held me at night. This was the man who told me he loved my ambition, my strength, to his family, behind my back. I was just a lucky charity case who knew her place. He did not defend me. He did not defend my father. He curated the insults. He managed the abuse like a PR crisis, ensuring it never reached my face but letting it flourish behind the screen. I looked at the timestamps. He had sent that message while we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, his head in my lap. I felt a coldness spread through my body, starting at my fingertips and seizing my heart. It was a clarity I had never felt before. The love I thought I had for him did not turn to hate instantly. It turned to ash. It simply died, suffocated by the lack of oxygen in this room of lies. I did not scream. I did not wake him up and demand an explanation. An explanation would imply that there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding here. Quietly, methodically, I opened my email app on his phone. I took screenshots. I captured everything. The Mr. Bus comments, the photos of my dad's hands, the jokes about my Greyhound career, and most importantly, Eli's betrayal. I attached them all to a new email. I typed my own email address in the recipient field. Subject line, receipts. I hit send. I waited until I saw the notification pop up on my own phone, which was charging on the kitchen counter. Then, I went into Eli's sent folder and permanently deleted the email. I closed the app. I locked the phone and placed it back on the coffee table, exactly 2 inches from the edge, just as he had left it. I stood over him for a long time. He looked so peaceful, so handsome in the dim light. He looked like the man I thought I married. But now I saw the truth. He was not a bridge between our worlds. He was a double agent. I realized then that the hierarchy I grew up with in Millstone had not disappeared. I had not escaped it. I had simply moved into a nicer house where the people at the top had better vocabulary for their cruelty. My father was not the furniture in their lives. I was the comfortable, functional asset they sat on, leaned on, and laughed at. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, but I did not get into bed. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights of Harborview, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was trying to catch up. I felt like I was already miles ahead, because I knew something they did not. I knew the war had started, and they were sleeping through the first attack. The laptop screen was the only source of light in the bedroom, casting a cold blue glow over my hands. Eli was asleep beside me, his breathing rhythmic and untroubled. The sleep of a man who believes the world revolves around him because it always has. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it Evidence or Divorce, or anything that might trigger an alarm if Eli ever borrowed my computer. I named it House Docs. It sat innocuously between a folder of medical journals and a folder of tax returns. Into this folder, I dragged the screenshots I had taken from his phone, the Mr. Bus comments, the Greyhound jokes, the photo of my father's hands. I named each file by date and subject. November 14th, Greg insult regarding Dad's hygiene. October 3rd, Vivian mockery of Dad's speech syntax. December 2nd, Eli betrayal. But as I sat there, the anger that had been a hot, chaotic fire in my chest began to cool into something harder, something like steel. I realized that the insults were only half the story. The Carters were not just cruel, they were expensive. I opened my banking app. I opened my credit card statements. I opened the spreadsheet where I tracked our household budget, a spreadsheet Eli claimed gave him a headache whenever I tried to show it to him. I began to cross-reference. I created a subfolder called Financials. I pulled up a transfer from 3 months ago, $15,000. I had wired it to Greg's personal account because Eli told me his dad was having a short-term cash flow issue regarding a permit for a new development and needed bridge capital immediately to avoid a penalty. I opened Instagram. I scrolled back 3 months on Greg's profile. There it was. The same week I wired $15,000 to save him from ruin. Greg had posted a photo album, Pebble Beach Perfection. The caption read, "He was standing on a manicured green, holding a driver that likely cost more than my dad's car, wearing a smile that said he didn't have a care in the world." I felt a vein throb in my temple. I took a screenshot of the bank transfer. I took a screenshot of the golf trip. I saved them side by side in the folder. I kept digging. There was the credit card bill from 6 months ago. Eli had maxed out his limit, entertaining clients. I had paid off the $8,000 balance to save his credit score. I checked Eli's Facebook timeline from that month. He wasn't entertaining clients. He was courtside at an NBA game in New York City with 2 of his fraternity brothers, wearing a jersey that still had the tag on it. October, $4,000 for Vivian's emergency roof repair. Instagram post. Same week. Vivian at a luxury wellness spa in Arizona, holding a cucumber water, #self-care, #much needed. The pattern was so clear it was blinding. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were living on my means. They were siphoning off the resources I earned with 16-hour shifts and sleepless nights, and then using that money to fund the lifestyle that allowed them to look down on me. I remembered a dinner from last Easter. We were at the main house in Silver Ridge. Greg had been on his 3rd glass of scotch, feeling expansive. "You know, Marin," he had said, clapping a hand on my shoulder that felt heavy and possessive, "it is good you have that hospital job. If the market dips, or if the development side hits a snag, you can always pick up extra shifts. Keep the ship afloat for the family, right?" The table had raised their glasses. To Marin, they had toasted. The safety net. At the time, I had felt a flush of pride. I thought they were acknowledging my contribution. I thought they were saying I was essential. Now, looking at the spreadsheet, I realized they were not toasting a family member. They were toasting a beast of burden. They were toasting the mule that carried the gold, so they could ride in the carriage. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from my dad. "Saw a nice toolbox on sale at the hardware store. Thought of you. Hope you're getting some rest. Kiddo, love, Dad." A lump formed in my throat, hard and painful. Dad knew something was wrong. He had that parent radar that could pick up a disturbance from miles away. Over the last few weeks, as I had started to wake up to the reality of my marriage, I had pulled away from him. I stopped calling every day. I made excuses when he offered to come over and fix the leaky gutter. I did not want to see him because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had let these people use his money, the money he broke his back for, to buy their way into places where they mocked him. I was protecting him from the truth, but in doing so, I was isolating the only person who actually loved me. I didn't reply to the text. I couldn't. Instead, I saved a screenshot of the text into the folder, a reminder of what pure love looked like compared to the transaction I was living in. The next day at the hospital, everything felt sharper. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter. The noises louder. I was doing rounds in the geriatric ward. I stopped at the bed of Mrs. Higgins, a woman in her 80s with a hip fracture and a heart of gold. She was in pain, clearly uncomfortable, but when I walked in, she tried to sit up and straighten her gown. "Oh, Dr. Ellery," she said, her voice thin and raspy. "I am so sorry to bother you. I know you are busy with important people. The pain medication seems to have worn off." I checked her chart. She had been due for a dose an hour ago, but she hadn't pressed the call button because she didn't want to be a nuisance. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, taking her hand. It was frail and paper-thin. "You are never a bother. You are my priority." I adjusted her pillows. I called the nurse. I stayed with her until the medication kicked in and her breathing eased. "You are a good girl," she whispered, her eyes drifting shut. "My son, He only comes when he needs something signed. Checks, papers. She let out a long, shuddering sigh. Some families, they just see you as a wallet with a pulse, don't they? Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, holding the hand of this stranger, and I saw my own life reflected in her sad, resigned eyes. A wallet with a pulse. That was what I was to the Carters. That was what my father was. I finished my rounds in a daze. The realization crystallized in my mind. The Carters talked constantly about tradition and legacy and standards, but those were just fancy words for parasitism. Their entire lifestyle was a house of cards, built on the backs of people they deemed inferior. That evening, I had to attend a cocktail mixer for Harborline Developments. It was held in a hotel ballroom that smelled of lilies and desperation. Greg was holding court near the bar, looking flushed and triumphant. I stood on the periphery, sipping a club soda, watching them. Vivian was telling a circle of women about her exhausting schedule of charity luncheons. Eli was nodding along to a potential investor, looking serious and important, though I knew he probably couldn't explain the details of the project he was pitching. I moved closer to Greg's circle. He was talking to a city councilman, his voice booming. "The key to Harborline," Greg was saying, gesturing with his glass, "is stability. We have rock-solid backing. People think I am the wizard behind the curtain. And sure, I do the heavy lifting." He laughed at his own joke. "But we have a structure. We have a silent shareholder who has been with the parent company for years." My ears perked up. Silent shareholder. "Oh?" the councilman asked. "Local money?" Greg lowered his voice, leaning in conspiratorially. "Old money, very private, hates the spotlight, only interested in the quarterly dividends, just signs the checks and stays out of the way. The perfect partner." Greg winked. "As long as the checks clear, I run the show. That is the beauty of it. He provides the fuel. I drive the car." Something clicked in my brain. A tumbler in a lock falling into place. Harborline Developments was a subsidiary. I knew that much. But Greg always acted like he owned the whole world. If there was a silent shareholder, someone who owned the controlling interest of the parent company, then Greg wasn't the owner. He was an employee with delusions of grandeur. And this shareholder hated the spotlight. I thought about the liquidity issues. I thought about the desperate need for bridge loans. If Greg was merely managing the company for a silent owner, then his personal wealth was likely tied entirely to his salary and bonuses. If the company struggled, he struggled. But who was the shareholder? I looked at Greg, sweating in his expensive suit, bragging about a man he clearly viewed as a useful idiot, just signs the checks and stays out of the way. A strange, cold feeling washed over me. It felt like the precursor to a diagnosis. The symptoms were there. I just needed to run the test. I slipped out of the party early. I did not say goodbye to Eli. I drove home in silence, the radio off, my mind racing. I went straight to my laptop. I opened the House Docs folder, but this time, I wasn't adding to it. I was preparing to use it. I needed to find out who really owned Harborline Developments, because if Greg Carter had a boss, then Greg Carter had a weakness. And if I could find the man who held the leash, maybe I could stop the dog from biting. I had no idea that the answer was not in some offshore account or hidden ledger. I had no idea that the answer had been sitting at my kitchen table in Millstone, drinking instant coffee and worrying about my happiness for my entire life. 3:00 in the morning is a dangerous time for the truth. It is the hour when the defenses of the day have crumbled, leaving only raw nerve endings and the cold blue light of a laptop screen. Eli was sound asleep in the master bedroom, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. I sat at the kitchen island, a mug of cold tea beside me, staring at the Secretary of State business entity search portal. The conversation I had overheard about the silent shareholder was playing on a loop in my mind, louder than the hum of the refrigerator. I typed in Harborline Developments. The results populated instantly. It was a standard limited liability company. The registered agent was a law firm in the city. The managers listed were Gregory Carter and Eli Carter. But there was another line item, one that detailed the ownership structure. Harbor Line was not an independent entity. It was fully owned by a parent holding company, Ellery Harbor Group. I frowned. The name seemed like a coincidence. Harbor for Harborview, obviously. But Ellery? It was not a common name, but it wasn't unique either. Perhaps it was an old family name of the Carters I didn't know about, or maybe a partner named Ellery. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I clicked on the hyperlink for Ellery Harbor Group. The page refreshed. I scrolled down to the section labeled Principals and Controlling Interests. My heart did not just stop. It felt as though it had been physically removed from my chest. Managing member and majority shareholder. Thomas J. Ellery, address 402 Maple Street, Millstone, Ohio. I stared at the screen. I blinked, sure that my exhaustion was hallucinating the text. I refreshed the page. The name remained, Thomas J. Ellery, my father, and the address was the small, siding-peeled ranch house I had grown up in, the house where the heat rattled in the winter, the house where we ate generic brand mac and cheese to save pennies. My father owned the company that employed my husband and father-in-law. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Suddenly, 1,000 fragmented memories from my childhood began to rearrange themselves into a new, shocking mosaic. I remembered the nights I would wake up for a glass of water and see Dad sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded not by mechanic manuals, but by stacks of legal-sized documents and financial prospectuses. I remembered him complaining about the paperwork never ending and assuming he meant logging bus repair schedules. I remembered the old, clunky desktop computer he bought secondhand, the one he spent hours on after his double shifts, telling me he was learning the machine. I remembered the day he retired early from the bus depot 3 years ago. He had been vague about it, saying he had shifted his focus and that his pension was doing better than expected. I had been so busy with my residency I never pressed him for details. I closed the laptop with a snap. I did not sleep. The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital, something I never did. I told Eli I had a migraine. As soon as he left for the office, an office my father apparently paid for, I drove to Millstone. I asked Dad to meet me at Patty's, the greasy spoon diner where we used to have breakfast for dinner on Fridays. When I walked in, he was sitting in a corner booth, wearing a flannel shirt and nursing a black coffee. He looked so normal. He looked like the man the Carters laughed at. I slid into the booth opposite him. I didn't say hello. I just placed the printout from the Secretary of State website on the Formica table between us. Dad looked at the paper. He didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind of sound a man makes when he finally sets down a load he has been carrying for miles. "I figured you would find out eventually," he said quietly. "You were always sharp. Marin, too sharp for your own good sometimes." "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You own Harbor Line? You own the company Greg runs? How? Why?" He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes looking past me, out the window at the gray street of Millstone. 30 years ago, right after your mom got sick, I joined an investment club with a few guys from the union. We put in $20 a week. Most guys quit. I didn't. I started reading. I realized that business is just like an engine. Marin, it has parts, inputs. "Listen to it," he said. "You can hear where the knock is." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, those same calloused hands the Carters mocked. I saw an opportunity in distressed commercial real estate in the 90s. I took a second mortgage on the house. It was a risk, a stupid risk, but it paid off. I reinvested everything, every dime. I bought a small stake in a development firm that was about to go under. I fixed their books like I fix a transmission. Over time, I bought more and more. Harbor Line is just one of the assets. Marin, there are others. I stared at him, my mind reeling. "But why do you live like this? Why do you let them treat you like dirt? Why let me pay for the wedding? Why let me struggle with the down payment on the house?" Dad's expression hardened. "The house money I gave you was from the dividends, and as for the rest, Marin, look at me. I met his gaze. I never told you because I wanted you to build your own muscles, he said. I wanted you to become the doctor, the woman you are, without a safety net making you soft. And you did. You are brilliant and strong. And the Carters? I asked, the anger rising in my throat. Why hide it from them? Why let Greg sneer at you? Because, Dad said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I wanted to know who they were, really were. If I walked in there wearing an Italian suit and flashing a platinum card, they would have rolled out the red carpet. They would have loved me. But they wouldn't have loved me. Marin, they would have loved the wallet. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. They never asked me who I was. Marin, not once. In 4 years. Greg Carter has never asked me a single question about my life, my thoughts, or my history. He only asks if I can fix his drywall. He only asks what I can do for him. That tells you everything you need to know about a man. Greg works for you, I said, stating the fact as if testing its weight. He is your employee. Technically, yes, Dad said. He runs the day-to-day operations of Harborline. I review the quarterly financials. I approve the major acquisitions. He thinks he reports to a board of faceless investors. He doesn't know the chairman he emails is the guy he asks to take out the trash. Does he know who he is emailing? No, all correspondence goes through my lawyer, Amelia. She strips the names. Dad reached into the canvas messenger bag he had brought with him. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. I was not going to show you this, he said, his face tightening with a mix of anger and sorrow. But after the way they treated you at the house last week, I think you need to see it. I unfolded the paper. It was a printout of an email from Greg Carter to the Board of Directors, Ellery Harbor Group. Subject, Q4. Cash flow projections and personal guarantee strategy. I scanned the dense corporate speak. Greg was explaining why the company was short on liquidity and how he planned to cover the gap. My eyes caught my own name in the third paragraph. Furthermore, regarding the personal guarantee requirements for the Bridgeview loan, I can confidently leverage the household income of my son's spouse, Dr. Marin Ellery. Her current salary and projected bonuses from the hospital group have been factored into our family solvency model, allowing us to defer the draw on the corporate line of credit. She is a reliable, fixed-income asset that mitigates our risk exposure. The heir left the diner. A reliable, fixed-income asset. They weren't just using my money for dinners and trips. They were underwriting their business failures with my labor. Greg had literally written me into his business plan as a financial buffer. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and fast. It was a strange mix of emotions. I was furious. Yes, I was heartbroken that the man I married viewed me as an insurance policy. But underneath it all, a strange, hysterical laughter was bubbling up in my chest. I looked at my dad. He looked back, his eyes fierce. I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner, he said. I was waiting for them to show a single ounce of decency, just one moment where they treated us like humans without a price tag attached, but they haven't. He took the email back and folded it carefully. I do not want to embarrass anyone, Marin. That is not my style. I like my quiet life. I like my porch. But I will be damned if I let them use the empire I built to crush my own daughter. I sat back against the vinyl booth. The world had tilted on its axis. The power dynamic that had suffocated me for years, the rich Carters versus the poor Ellerys, was a lie. It was a complete fabrication. The man they called the janitor held the deed to their kingdom. The man they mocked for his smell was the only reason their checks didn't bounce. And he had the power to turn off the tap. So, I said, wiping my face and looking at my father with a new, profound awe, what do we do now? Dad signaled the waitress for the check. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, not a Velcro one, but a simple, sturdy leather one, and laid a $5 bill on the table. Well, he said, a small, mischievous glint appearing in his eye for the first time. I believe there is a gala coming up, and I believe the chairman of Ellery Harbor Group is overdue for a site visit. He stood up and buttoned his flannel shirt. Let's go see a lawyer. Marin, I think it is time we updated the organizational chart. I followed him out of the diner. As I watched him walk to his old Ford truck, I didn't see a tired mechanic anymore. I saw a titan who had been sleeping, waiting for the right reason to wake up, and I was the reason. The law office of Amelia Reyes was nothing like the chaotic, cluttered warmth of my father's kitchen table, nor was it anything like the ostentatious, gold-leafed pretension of the Carter estate. It was cold, sharp, and clinical. Located on the 42nd floor of a Glass Needle in downtown, it smelled of espresso and printer toner. Amelia Reyes herself was a woman who seemed to be carved out of granite. She did not offer cookies. She did not ask about my feelings. When Dad and I walked in, she simply pointed to the leather chairs opposite her desk and opened a file that was already 3 inches thick. "I have reviewed the corporate bylaws of Ellery Harbor Group," Amelia said, her voice crisp, "and I have reviewed the employment contracts for the subsidiary, Harborline Developments. Frankly, Mr. Ellery, you have been running this company with a handshake and a prayer. That ends today." Dad nodded, looking more serious than I had ever seen him. He wasn't the mechanic in the flannel shirt today. He was the man who had quietly built an empire. "Do what needs to be done, Amelia. I am done being the silent partner." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in surgical deconstruction. Amelia didn't just tweak the paperwork, she weaponized it. First, we restructured the management hierarchy. Up until now, Greg had operated with near-total autonomy, assuming the board was just a rubber stamp. Amelia drafted a new resolution. It explicitly stated that the position of CEO at Harborline was an at-will appointment, subject to the immediate discretion of the majority shareholder. Then came the conduct clause. I added a specific provision regarding the reputation and conduct of executive officers, Amelia said, sliding a document across the mahogany desk for Dad to sign. It states that any executive who engages in behavior that disparages, harasses, or creates a hostile environment for the majority shareholder or their immediate family is subject to immediate termination for cause. This includes digital communication, private correspondence, and public behavior. I read the text. It was a legal bear trap. Every time Greg or Eli mocked Dad in their group chat, they weren't just being jerks. They were now violating a corporate covenant that could strip them of their severance packages. "And the money?" I asked, my voice steady. "Frozen," Amelia said. "I have issued a directive to the CFO. All discretionary spending accounts are suspended pending a full audit. The corporate credit cards Greg and Vivian use for their networking dinners, canceled as of 9 o'clock this morning. Any request for capital injection, like those bridge loans Greg loves to ask for, now requires the physical signature of the chairman." Dad took the pen. He hovered over the signature line for a moment. He wasn't smiling. There was no joy in this for him. He was just a man who had finally realized that his kindness was being treated as a weakness. "I built this company to build things," Dad said softly, "not to support people who tear others down." He signed. The scratch of the pen sounded like a gavel banging down. When we left the office, I felt lighter, but also sharper. The legal firewall was in place. Now, I had to build my own. I went straight to the bank. I sat down with a personal banker and methodically dismantled the financial entanglement I had with Eli. I opened a new checking account in my name only. I instructed the hospital payroll department to redirect 100% of my salary to this new account effective immediately. Then, the credit cards. We had a joint account that Eli used for household expenses. I pulled up the statement on my phone while the banker typed. There were charges from last week. A $400 tab at a steakhouse, $200 at a golf pro shop, $60 for premium cigars. "Close it," I told the banker. "Ma'am, there is a pending balance," the banker warned, "and authorized user Eli Carter will be notified if he tries to use the card." "I will pay the balance," I said, writing a check from my personal savings, "and let him be notified at the register. Just cut the cord." I walked out of the bank with a folder of new account documents. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. the feeling of oxygen returning to a room that had been airless for years. The next step was the stage. We needed a venue where the truth could not be hidden, where the Carters could not spin the narrative. The Harborview Winter Gala was the premier event of the season. It was a black-tie fundraiser for the city's Historical Preservation Society. Usually, the Carters bought the cheapest tickets available and spent the night schmoozing near the VIP tables, trying to look like they belonged. This year, Ellery Harbor Group was the platinum sponsor. I drafted the email to Vivian myself. I knew exactly which buttons to push. I knew her vanity was stronger than her suspicion. Hi, Vivian. I managed to secure a full table at the Winter Gala next week through a donor at the hospital. The event organizers have set up a professional portrait studio for the platinum guests. I thought it would be the perfect opportunity for us to finally get that high-end family portrait you have been wanting for the Christmas card. My treat. The photographer is supposed to be world-class. I hit send and waited. The reply came in 3 minutes. Oh, Marin. Finally. That is a wonderful idea. I have been saying for months we need new imaging. The lighting at the club last year was dreadful. We will be there. Make sure Eli wears his velvet tux. And tell your father to, well, just tell him to wear something neutral. I smiled at the screen. It was a cold, humorless smile. She had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. She was so blinded by the promise of a high-end portrait that she didn't ask how her daughter-in-law, whom she viewed as a glorified nurse, had secured a platinum table. Next, I contacted the photographer. His name was Lucas Ortiz. He was an artist known for his raw, emotive portraits of city life. I knew from Dad that Lucas had started his career documenting the working class of Millstone, and that Dad's company had given him a grant years ago to open his first studio. I sent him a private email. Subject: Gala Portrait Session. Special instruction. Dear Lucas, I am writing regarding the Ellery Harbor Group session at the gala. Attached is a photo of the company chairman, Thomas Ellery. He will be attending with his family. He is a humble man and will likely try to stand in the back. Please ensure he is given the respect his title warrants. He has been the silent engine behind this city's restoration for decades, and this night is about him. Lucas replied within the hour. I know Tom. He fixed my first car when I was 16 and didn't charge me a dime because he knew I was saving for a camera. I had no idea he was the chairman. Consider it handled. It will be an honor. The stage was set. The players were in motion. All that was left was the script. I spent the night before the gala compiling the final piece of my arsenal. I bought a slim, matte black file folder. It looked professional, unassuming. Inside, I placed the printed screenshots of the Carter Core chat, the insults about the bus driver, the jokes about my dad's clothes, the sneering comments about my Greyhound career. Behind those, I filed the bank transfer records, the $15,000 for Greg's bridge loan, the invoices for the wedding I paid for, the receipts for the townhouse down payment. I arranged them chronologically. It wasn't a messy pile of papers. It was a narrative. It was a story told in numbers and timestamps. It was a moral balance sheet, and the Carters were deep in the red. I held the folder in my hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt dense, like it contained the gravitational pull of a collapsing star. This wasn't something I was going to wave around and scream about. I wasn't going to make a scene. That was Vivian's way. No, this was for after. This was the receipt I would hand them when the bill finally came due. I placed the folder in my purse. Honey, Eli called from the bedroom. Have you seen my cufflinks? The gold ones? Check the top drawer, I called back, my voice calm, steady, betraying nothing. Found them, he shouted. God, I hope the food is good tomorrow. Usually, these charity things serve rubber chicken, but at least the networking will be good for Dad. He says he's close to landing a big fish. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I smoothed my hair. Yes, I whispered to the empty hallway. The networking will be very revealing. The date was set. The clock was ticking. The Carters were excitedly planning their outfits, discussing which angles made them look richest, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already been sold, and the eviction notice was sitting in my purse. The silence in our master bedroom was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the sound of Eli humming to himself as he adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. He was rehearsing his elevator pitch for the gala, murmuring phrases like synergistic growth and high-yield horizons to his reflection. He looked the part of the successful executive, sleek, polished, and utterly hollow. "Do I look authoritative?" he asked, turning to me and flashing a smile that was practiced to perfection. "Dad says there are going to be some heavy hitters from the Capital Group there tonight. I need to look like I am ready for a seat at the big table." I was standing by the dresser, clasping a simple diamond necklace, the only piece of jewelry I owned that hadn't been a suggestion from Vivian. "You look fine, Eli," I said, my voice flat. "Just fine?" he frowned, picking a piece of lint off his velvet lapel. "Well, I guess that will have to do." He paused, looking at me through the mirror. "Hey, did you remind your dad about the dress code? I know you said he's getting some sort of little participation award from the Historical Society, but we don't want him showing up in his work boots." My fingers froze on the clasp of my necklace. I had told Eli vaguely that Dad was being recognized for his community contributions. Eli had assumed it was a token gesture, like a perfect attendance certificate, and hadn't asked a single follow-up question. "He knows it is a black tie event, Eli," I said, turning to face him, "and it is not a participation award. He is being honored." Eli waved his hand dismissively. Right, whatever. Just maybe manage him, okay? If he starts talking about carburetors or bus schedules, just steer him toward the buffet. We need to make a good impression tonight. This is big for the brand." "The brand," I repeated. "Yes, the brand. The Carter legacy." He checked his watch. A new chronograph he had bought last week, likely with the money I had transferred to cover the mortgage. "We should go. Mom is texting. She says the lighting in the entryway is peak right now." I picked up my clutch. Inside, sitting heavy against the lining, was the slim black folder. It felt hotter than a burning coal. "Let's go," I said. "I would hate to miss the lighting." The gala was being held at the Old Union Terminal, a massive, cavernous train station that had been converted into an event space. The irony was sharp enough to cut. This was the kind of place my father had spent his life keeping alive, greasing the gears, fixing the hydraulics, ensuring the working class could get to their shifts. Now, it had been scrubbed clean, the smell of diesel replaced by expensive perfume, the concrete floors covered in plush red carpets for people who had never ridden a bus in their lives. We met the Carters near the entrance. They were impossible to miss. Vivian was wearing a silver gown that shimmered like fish scales, and Greg was holding court with a glass of champagne, laughing loudly at his own joke. "There they are!" Vivian shrieked, rushing over to air-kiss my cheek, being careful not to smudge her lipstick. "Oh, Marin, that dress is safe, very sensible." She immediately pivoted to Eli, her eyes lighting up. "And look at you, my vice president. You look like $1 million. "Thanks, Mom," Eli beamed, preening under her praise. Greg slapped Eli on the back. "Ready to work the room, son? I saw the mayor over by the Raw Bar. Let's go make sure he knows who the future of Harbor Line is." They started to move toward the main hall, completely ignoring me. "Actually," I said, planting my feet, "Dad is here. We should wait for him." Vivian stopped, her shoulders stiffening slightly. She turned back with a tight, pained smile. "Oh, right. Tom, is he driving himself?" "He is walking up now," I said, pointing toward the glass doors. Dad was walking through the entrance. He looked exactly as I knew he would. He was wearing the charcoal blazer he had bought at the discount store, the one Vivian had sneered at during the wedding fitting. But tonight, he had paired it with a crisp white shirt and the silk tie I had bought him for my medical school graduation, the only expensive piece of clothing he allowed himself to own. He walked with a quiet dignity, his hands clasped behind his back, looking up at the high, vaulted ceiling of the station. He didn't look cowed by the luxury, He looked like he was inspecting the structural integrity of the beams. When he reached us, he offered a shy smile. "Evening, everyone. You all look sharp." Vivian looked him up and down. Her gaze lingered on the slightly wide lapels of his jacket and the faint scuff on his dress shoes. "Tom," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You look very authentic. At least you are consistent. I suppose there is a certain charm in refusing to evolve." Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, let's get inside before the appetizers run out. I am sure you worked up an appetite today. Tom, did you have a long shift?" It was a dig, a calculated reminder of his station. "Actually," Dad said, his voice calm and steady, "I had a very productive day. Lots of meetings." "Meetings?" Greg laughed, winking at Eli. "Right. The union meetings can be tough. Fight for that overtime. Tom, fight the power." They turned and swept into the gala, leaving Dad and me standing in their wake. I reached out and took my father's hand. His palm was rough, warm, and solid. "You okay?" I whispered. "Never better," he winked. "The architecture in here is amazing. They don't build trusses like this anymore." We made our way to the VIP section. The Carters had already commandeered the center of the room, positioning themselves near the designated photography area. The setup was elaborate: a professional studio backdrop, heavy velvet curtains, and a lighting rig that looked suitable for a Vogue cover shoot. "Okay, listen," I heard Vivian whispering to Greg and Eli as I approached with Dad. They were huddled together, backs to us, assuming the noise of the crowd masked their voices. "When we do the group shot, we put Tom on the far left, against the dark curtain. If the lighting is right, he will blend in. If not, I can have the editor crop him out later. We need a clean image for the holiday newsletter. The Carter legacy. We can't have visual clutter." "Visual clutter," Eli muttered. "Yeah, I agree. It distracts from the cohesion." I stopped walking. I felt a cold numbness spread through my limbs. Visual clutter. That was what they called the man who had secretly funded their company for decades. I stepped away, pretending to take a call. I needed a moment to breathe before I did something that would ruin the plan. I stood near a decorative pillar, watching them. They were preening, checking their teeth in their phone cameras, fixing their hair. Eli was standing slightly apart from his parents, checking his smartwatch. I was close enough, and the angle was just right. I saw the screen of his watch light up in the dim hall. It was a notification from Carter Core. I saw the image. It was a meme. Someone, probably Bethany, had taken a photo of a janitor mopping a floor and superimposed my dad's face onto it. The caption read, "Cleaning up after the real VIPs." I watched Eli read it. I waited for the disgust. I waited for him to delete it. I waited for him to finally, after all this time, show a spine. Instead, he tapped the screen. I saw his reply dictate onto the watch face. "Lol. Don't worry. We will take a separate one without him later. Just family." Just family. The words hung in the air like smoke. That was it. That was the final thread. There was no misunderstanding. There was no, "He is just trying to keep the peace." He was actively conspiring to erase my father from our lives while spending my father's money. The last vestige of the woman who wanted to save her marriage evaporated. The Marin who had made excuses, who had tried to bridge the gap, who had believed in love over logic, she was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone who had brought a black folder to a party. I pulled out my phone. I didn't look at Eli. I texted my dad, who was standing quietly by the buffet, examining the construction of a chafing dish. "Dad, you okay?" He felt the buzz. He pulled out his old, cracked smartphone. He read the message, looked up, and found me across the room. He didn't wave. He just smiled. That same smile he gave me when he sat in the back of the auditorium in his work clothes. His reply came through a second later. "With you here, I am. That is all that matters." I stared at the screen. The simplicity of it broke my heart and mended it all at once. He didn't care about the insults. He didn't care about the gala. He only cared that I was there. The contrast between his unconditional love and the Carter's conditional acceptance was so stark it was blinding. "The Carter Ellery party?" a voice called out. The event coordinator, a woman with a headset and a clipboard, was waving at us. "The photographer is ready for you now. If you could please step into the studio area." Vivian clapped her hands. "Showtime. Come on, everyone, shoulders back. Greg, suck in the gut." They moved toward the backdrop like moths to a flame, hungry for the light. I slipped my phone into my purse. I felt the cool, smooth surface of the black folder against my fingertips. I gripped it tight. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of expensive lilies and impending justice. "Coming," I said. I walked toward them, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. I wasn't just walking into a photo shoot. I was walking into the last 5 minutes of their ignorance, and I was going to savor every second of it. The studio setup was a fortress of artificial perfection. Heavy velvet ropes cordoned off the designated photography area, and the lighting rig overhead was bright enough to simulate a sunny day in the middle of December. The backdrop was a painted canvas of a marble library, intended to convey intelligence and old money, two things the Carters were currently simulating with varying degrees of success. "Okay, let's get into formation," Vivian barked, clapping her hands. She moved with the frantic energy of a stage manager whose show is about to derail. "Greg, you are the anchor. Center stage. Button that jacket. Eli. Right shoulder forward, chin down. We want that Fortune 500 jawline." I watched as they arranged themselves. It was a practiced geometry of exclusion. Vivian and Greg took the prime real estate in the center. Eli slid in next to them, leaning comfortably against his father, creating a tight, impenetrable triangle of Carter unity. And then there was my dad. "And Tom?" Vivian waved a hand vaguely toward the edge of the set, not even looking at him. "Just squeeze in on the end there. No, further over. We need to leave room for the logo to be photoshopped in later." Dad stepped to the side. He was standing on the very periphery of the seamless paper, his shoulder brushing against a light stand. He looked like an afterthought, a photobomber in his own family portrait. "Perfect," Vivian declared, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She turned to the photographer, Lucas Ortiz, who was adjusting his lens settings. "Lucas, darling, listen to me. Focus on the core trio here. Snap a few with us first. If we have time before the next VIPs arrive, we can do a wide shot with Marin's father, but prioritize the brand image. Understood?" She spoke about him as if he were a piece of rented furniture that clashed with the upholstery. Greg let out a short, sharp laugh. "Yeah, keep him near the edge. If he stands too close to the backdrop, people might think he is part of the event staff waiting to clean up the confetti." A few donors standing nearby, holding champagne flutes, chuckled politely. They didn't know the context. They just knew that when a man in a $3,000 tuxedo makes a joke, you laugh. I felt the blood drain from my face, replaced by a cold, vibrating rage. I gripped the black folder in my hands so hard the edges bent. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to burn the whole facade down right there. But Lucas Ortiz moved first. Lucas had been busy checking his light meter, but at the sound of Greg's joke and the mention of the name Tom, he froze. He lowered the camera slowly. He looked at the group posed in front of him. The preening Carters and the quiet, dignified man standing in the shadows. Then, Lucas looked down at the gala program clipped to his tripod. I saw his eyes scan the text. I knew exactly what he was reading. It was the page I had ensured was printed and distributed to every vendor. Honoring Thomas J. Ellery, chairman of Ellery Harbor Group, for 3 decades of silent leadership, integrity, and the revitalization of the Harborview District. Lucas looked up. His expression had changed completely. The professional detachment of a hired photographer was gone, replaced by a look of dawning realization and profound shock. He didn't take the picture. He set the expensive camera down on the equipment table with a deliberate, heavy thud. The sudden lack of the shutter click was deafening. The area went quiet. Vivian, who had been holding a frozen smile for 10 seconds, finally broke her pose. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice shrill. "Is it the lighting? I told you the fill light was too harsh on my left side." Lucas ignored her. He didn't even look at her. He walked past the lights, past the velvet ropes, and stepped onto the set. He walked straight toward the edge, straight toward my father. The silence in the room deepened. It rippled outward, catching the attention of the surrounding tables. People stopped chewing. Glasses stopped clinking. Everyone was watching the photographer walk past the wealthy, influential Carters to approach the man in the outlet store blazer. Lucas stopped 3 feet in front of Dad. And then, he did something that made the air leave the room. He bowed. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. It was a slight, respectful inclination of the head, a gesture of genuine deference one might offer to a head of state. When he straightened up, his voice was low, but in the cavernous acoustics of the train station, it carried clearly to everyone nearby. "Chairman Ellery," Lucas said, his tone thick with reverence, "I apologize. I did not recognize you immediately. It is an absolute honor to see you here." Dad looked at Lucas, blinking in surprise. "Lucas, is that you? You have grown a beard." "I have, sir." Lucas smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed his face. "I just wanted to say thank you. My studio. The grant you approved for the Arts District 5 years ago? That was me. You signed the check that built my career. I would not be holding a camera today if it weren't for your vision." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Chairman, grant, vision. I watched the realization hit the Carters like a physical wave. Vivian went pale. The color didn't just drain from her face. It vanished, leaving her looking gray and aged under the harsh studio lights. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from Lucas to my father, her brain trying to compute the impossible equation that the bus driver she had mocked was the benefactor she was trying to impress. Greg's jaw locked. He looked like he had swallowed a stone. His eyes darted around the room, seeing the people whispering, seeing the sudden shift in attention. The man who bragged about his silent shareholder was suddenly realizing that the shareholder had been sitting at his dinner table, enduring his insults, for years. And Eli looked small. He looked at me, then at Dad, his eyes wide with a panic that was just beginning to set in. He looked like a child who had just realized the monster under the bed was actually the landlord, and the rent was overdue. The whispers in the room grew to a buzz. "Did he say Ellery? Wait, is that the owner of the Harbor Group? I thought he was a recluse. That is the guy Greg Carter said was his maintenance man?" Lucas turned back to the room, unaware or perhaps entirely aware of the chaos he had just unleashed. He gestured to the set. "If you don't mind, Chairman," Lucas said, his voice projecting authority, "I would like to adjust the composition. A man of your standing should not be on the periphery." He turned to the Carters. His eyes were cold now. "Could you all shift to the sides, please? We need to center the chairman." It wasn't a request. It was a direction. For a second, nobody moved. The old hierarchy was fighting against the new reality. Then, Dad stepped forward. He didn't do it with arrogance. He didn't smirk. He just took one step, moving from the shadows into the direct glare of the key light. He looked at Greg. He didn't say a word. He just waited. Greg, looking like a man walking to the gallows, took a shuffling step to the left. Vivian, trembling visibly, moved to the right. Eli was left stranded, unsure of where to go, until a sharp look from Lucas sent him scurrying to the edge of the frame, the exact spot where they had tried to put my father. Dad stood in the center. The backdrop of the marble library finally made sense. He looked like he owned it, because he did. I stood behind the photographer, tears pricking my eyes. This was the moment. The inversion was complete. Dad looked at the lens. Then, his eyes flicked past the camera and found me. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "We are okay." Lucas lifted the camera. "Ready? On 3, 1, 2. Flash. The light exploded, freezing the moment in time. In that split second of blinding white, the truth was seared into history. My father, standing tall and dignified in the center of the frame, and the Carters, huddled on the edges, looking like uncomfortable guests in a house they had pretended to own, their fake smiles cracking under the weight of their own hubris. The flash died down, leaving spots in my vision. But the real aftermath was just beginning. I gripped the black folder tighter. The photo was taken. Now it was time to show them the bill. The flash of the camera died down, leaving a purple afterimage burning in my retina. But the real electricity in the room was coming from the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The photo session was over, but nobody moved to disperse. Instead, the invisible velvet rope that had separated the VIPs from the help had dissolved, and the center of gravity had shifted entirely to the man in the outlet store blazer. Before Vivian could rush over to check the digital preview on the monitor, a group of 3 men in impeccable tuxedos approached the set. I recognized them immediately. They were the senior board members of the Ellery Harbor Group, the men Greg had been trying to impress for 3 years. They did not look at Greg. They walked right past him. "Chairman Ellery," the tallest of them said, extending a hand to my father. "We were hoping you would make an appearance tonight. The restoration project on the East Wing is ahead of schedule, thanks to your approval of the budget increase." "Good to hear." "Arthur," Dad said, shaking the hand firmly, "I want to make sure the materials are sourced locally. We need to keep those jobs in the district." "Of course, sir." Arthur nodded. "We have already adjusted the contracts per your memo." Greg stood there, his mouth slightly ajar, his champagne glass tilting dangerously in his hand. He looked like a man watching a foreign movie without subtitles, trying desperately to understand the plot. Vivian, ever the social survivalist, recovered first. She let out a laugh that was too loud, too shrill, and far too desperate. She stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Dad's arm, acting as if she hadn't been trying to crop him out of the family narrative 5 minutes ago. "Oh, Tom is practically family to us," Vivian announced to the board members, beaming with a terrifying intensity. "We were just joking earlier about his understated style. We love how humble he is. Isn't that right, Greg?" She elbowed her husband. Greg blinked, snapping out of his trance. "Right," Greg stammered, sweating visibly. "Tom and I go way back. We have a very unique dynamic." "Yes," I said, stepping into the circle. My voice was calm, not loud, but it cut through the chatter like a scalpel. "You certainly do have a unique dynamic. You spend his money, and he allows you to keep your job." Vivian's smile froze. "Marin, darling, don't be crude." I didn't look at her. I opened my clutch and pulled out the slim black folder. I removed the first envelope, a thick cream-colored packet with the legal seal of Amelia Reyes on the front. I slid it across the small cocktail table toward Greg. "This is for you, Greg," I said. "What is this?" Greg asked, his laugh nervous. "A Christmas bonus?" "Open it," I said. He tore the seal. As he read the cover letter, his face went from flushed to pale, and then to a sickly shade of gray. This is a suspension notice," he whispered. "Pending an internal investigation, conduct unbecoming, hostile work environment." He looked up, his eyes wild. "You can't do this. I am the CEO of Harborline." "You are the manager," I corrected him, "and you serve at the pleasure of the chairman. The bylaws are very specific about executives who disparage the majority shareholder. We have quite a file on that." I tapped the black folder. "We have logs of you mocking the chairman's appearance. We have records of you calling him the janitor while charging your golf trips to the company expense account. It is all here. Greg, Amelia Reyes is waiting for you in her office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Until then, your access to the company accounts has been revoked." A board member, Arthur, cleared his throat. He looked at Greg with cool detachment. "We will discuss the specifics on Monday, Mr. Carter, but for tonight, please remember that you are here as a guest, not as a representative of the firm." It was a polite way of telling him he had been neutered. I turned to Eli. He was standing slightly behind his mother. looking terrified. He saw the second envelope in my hand. "Marin," he started, his voice cracking. "Babe, let's not do this here. Everyone is watching." "You didn't mind when everyone was watching you laugh at my father," I said. I handed him the envelope. "This is for you." He didn't open it. He knew what it was. "Divorce papers?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "Marin, you are overreacting. You are being hysterical. So we made a few jokes. So what? That is just how my family is. We roast each other. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I said. "You are going to throw away our marriage because of a group chat?" Eli demanded, his voice rising, trying to regain control by making me look unreasonable. "Because I didn't defend his blazer? Grow up, Marin." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply opened the folder to the page I had marked with a red tab. "October 3rd, I read aloud, my voice steady. "Greg posts a photo of my father's hands. He writes, 'He looks like he is about to ask the waiter if he can fix the dishwasher.' Vivian replies with a vomiting emoji. I looked up. The people around us were listening now. "And you, Eli," I continued. "You replied, 'Don't worry, Dad. Marin knows she punched above her weight. She is just happy to be in the club. She won't go anywhere.'" I closed the folder. "You were wrong, Eli. I am going somewhere." Eli's face was a mask of shock. He tried to stammer a defense, but there was no defending the indefensible. The cruelty was raw and undeniable. Dad stepped forward then. He put a hand on my shoulder. His touch was gentle, an anchor in the storm. "Marin," he said softly, "you don't have to do this for me. I can take it. I have taken it for years." I turned to him, and for the first time that night, my composure almost cracked. "I know you can, Dad," I said, my voice thick. "But I won't let you. I am not doing this for you. I am doing this for us. I am doing this because I refuse to let them use the empire you built to crush the people you love." Vivian, realizing the walls were closing in, played her final card. She drew herself up, clutching her diamond necklace as if she were the victim of a great tragedy. "After everything we have done for you," she spat, her voice trembling with indignation. "We welcomed you into our home. We gave you status. We gave you a wedding at Ridgecrest Vineyards. We let you live in a townhouse in Harborview. You ungrateful little—" "Stop," I said. I reached into the folder one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a spreadsheet, a list of every transaction, every check, every covered debt. "The wedding?" I said, reading from the list. "Paid for by check number 402, drawn from my savings account, $42,000. I looked at her. "The townhouse down payment? $60,000, paid by Thomas J. Ellery." I looked at Greg. "The bridge loan for your liquidity crisis last fall? $15,000, wired from my personal account." I looked at Eli. "The credit card debt you racked up entertaining clients at the NBA game? $8,000, paid by me." I held the paper out to Vivian. She didn't take it. She just stared at it, her face a portrait of ruin. "You didn't do anything for me, Vivian," I said, putting the paper back in the folder. "I paid for my own admission to this circus, and now I am requesting a refund." I looked at the three of them. Greg, stripped of his power, Vivian, stripped of her pretension, and Eli, stripped of his wife. They looked small. They looked like strangers. "You are welcome," I said. I turned my back on them. I walked over to Lucas, who was still standing by his camera, looking like he wanted to applaud. "Lucas," I said, my voice clear and strong, "would you mind doing me one favor? Could you send me a digital file of one specific photo? I just want the one of me and my dad." Lucas grinned. "Absolutely. Honestly, Marin, that is the only one worth keeping. The rest is just noise." "Thank you," I said. I walked back to my father. He was watching me with a look I will never forget. It wasn't just pride. It was awe. He held out his arm. "Ready to go, Dad?" I asked. "I think we have overstayed our welcome." I think you are right, he said. Let's go get a burger. I know a place in Millstone that makes them greasy, just the way we like them. That sounds perfect, I said. I took his arm. We walked away from the set. We walked past the board members who nodded respectfully. We walked past the donors who were whispering behind their hands. We walked past the Carters, who were standing alone under the harsh studio lights. 3 people in expensive clothes with absolutely nothing left to cover them. We pushed through the heavy glass doors of the terminal and stepped out into the night. The air was freezing, sharp and clean against my skin. It smelled of snow and exhaust and freedom. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but a bad investment. Beside me was the man who had built the world, and for the first time in a long time, I was walking in the right direction. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking this journey of justice with Marin and Tom. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed seeing the tables turn, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay strong.